Hello and welcome to another episode of DeHaan on Fire, brought to you by FireWise Learning Academy. I'm your host, Tim Davis. DeHaan on Fire is a YouTube channel and podcast featuring education, commentary, and conversation with Dr. John DeHaan and his colleagues and friends. Many a fire investigator has stood at the scene of a total loss fire, staring into an empty pit of a basement of nothing left of a house or business that was there before. To many, it seems like there's nothing left to investigate. But is that really the case? That's the question I put to Dr. DeHaan this week. DeHaan on Fire contains discussion and video not suitable for all audiences. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Dr. DeHaan, in the case of a total loss where you're basically just left with an empty, burned out basement, is there anything left to investigate?
Well, yeah. You may not be able to ever establish the origin of the fire, given fire damage that's far too excessive, and all you have left is charred bits of wood. But there's other things that you can look for. Primarily, make sure there are no human remains in the fire scene, because there's nothing worse than having a fire and you've kind of done what you could as far as the investigation, and then somebody comes along weeks later and says, "Gee, we haven't seen Aunt Millie since the fire." And you go, okay, and you have to go back in and see if there are remains that could be identified as Aunt Millie. That's pretty embarrassing. It's very traumatic for the family as well. And there have been some not too distant cases that's happened. Another important consideration is there may still be physical evidence of fraud, especially in commercial fire losses, where the investigator comes in and discovers that the remains of appliances that are reported to have been there are no longer there after the fire. Stock, somebody said, well, you can always count the coat hangers, in a clothing store or in somebody's closet, for instance, to see if those have been removed, because most people are just going to take the clothing and the hangers with. So sometimes it pays to count the hangers, and similar non-combustible residues that suggest that things were removed or substituted prior to the fire may support a further investigation. Those are useful. And of course, you also have fire alarm systems, remote fire alarm systems that sometimes record the operation of the alarm, and sometimes what sprinklers were used came into effect and things like that, or sprinklers that didn't operate, and those are remote records. And if the investigator can think of it and find the off-site data system, then that's important evidence that could be useful, even though the building itself is a complete loss. The problem is that investigators, when they're faced with a complete burnout, then they assume that there isn't anything. Or if they do take photographs, for instance, of what they suspect might be a significant thing, they don't understand the dynamics of a fully involved house fire. A fully developed house fire, of course, will develop temperatures in excess of 2,000 degrees just from ordinary combustibles in a well-ventilated fire of significant duration. And as a result, you can get alloying of metals together. You get very unusual melting patterns and things like that when zinc, for instance, comes in contact with steel at high temperatures, or copper and aluminum can melt together and form a very low melting point alloy, and you get huge ranges of damage to wiring, and it has nothing to do with the passage of electricity. And the investigator has to realize that there are some unusual features of a complete burnout that maybe he or she had never encountered before. And that's why live fire education or education opportunities are so useful for fire investigators, because people say, well, how do you know this happens? Well, because I've stood there and helped start a fire in a structure and watched it burn to completion and then looked to see what survived. And that's really valuable, irreplaceable data on which you can test your hypotheses.
Thanks for watching another episode of DeHaan on Fire, brought to you by Firewise Learning Academy. If you have any questions for Dr. DeHaan, please email them to questions@DeHaanOnFire. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. Ring the bell to get notifications of new uploads to the channel, and don't forget to set your devices to receive those updates. For now, signing off for Firewise Learning Academy and DeHaan on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Davis. See you next time.